Okay, great. I'll just begin. Hi, everybody. My name is Douglas Horn. I am the white paper author and architect of Telos. Telos is a third generation blockchain, as Michael was saying. Let me give you just a little bit of context about what that means. So 10 years ago and a few days, Bitcoin came into the world on January 3rd of 2009. And it was a brand new invention in computer technology, because it allowed a way for people who didn't know each other and didn't have to trust each other or have secure communications to still be able to make ongoing decisions about something, in this case, what was written on a ledger. I'm sure you're here, so you understand that. If we don't, I'm not going to go over that. It was a revolution, and every blockchain innovation that's come after it has stood on the shoulders of that giant. Bitcoin is amazing technology, and it's by starting it off, it started off something amazing, but in 10 years, a lot of things have grown in a way that allow us to move closer to just what our expectations are for what blockchain could be and what it could do for the world, and how it could basically completely change the internet, and how the internet and decentralize it so that you don't have powers like Facebook basically owning all of our data, or big banks being between us and peer-to-peer transactions for financial transactions, or for computing type transactions, right? So Bitcoin was fantastic. That's what we call first generation blockchain. There were a very large number of new forks off of Bitcoin. Things like we all know that Litecoin was one, and Doge, and Dash, and just a number of others. There's a plethora of first generation iterations. Ethereum was the first second generation. Ethereum will let you run smart contracts, so you could take this worldwide distributed consensus that was invented with Bitcoin, and then do something even much more useful with it by allowing people to run contracts that would automatically execute and be able to do good stuff, right? So I'm sure probably most of you are familiar also with Ethereum, and are probably excited about the way that smart contracts let you build apps, or dApps. I personally call them apps. I'm talking about decentralized apps, but I call them that because I think that the word dApps is kind of gets in the way of our ultimate audience, which is general computer users. But I digress. So Ethereum allows you to build these apps, or dApps, and you do really exciting things, and that we're looking at that as the future. There's a few problems with Ethereum, though. Number one is it has a gas fee, which means that every single transaction you have to pay a little bit of money. Of course, somebody has to be paid to do this, but that gets in the way of users being able to, really the user experience and the usefulness of it. Another issue with second generation blockchain is that you have it's really near capacity, right? Ethereum gets very clogged pretty easily. One game has like CryptoKitties, massively clogged the network. And if you were to look on something like Blocktivity, and you can see where it is compared to its theoretical max, it's pegged very much in the red. So something needs to address that before there can be mass adoption, which is what we really want. And then there's the problem of the block time. So Ethereum runs on a 12-second block time, which is much, much faster than Bitcoin's 10-minute block time, or Litecoin's 2.5-minute block time. But it's really not fast enough for general computer users. That means that even if your transaction is immediately picked up in the next block, when the minute you press go on your app, it's going to be at least 12 seconds before it's executed. And more likely, because of the gas cost and the clogging of the network, it's going to be a lot longer than that. So that does not meet the world's expectations. And then I guess the fourth problem with the fourth thing that should be addressed with second generation blockchains like Ethereum and its derivatives is that if you send something to the wrong address, or if you get phished, right, or like it's a DAO situation, then that is just lost. And the world, we are all excited about blockchain, but our extended families and friends and people are like that are not going to buy into a system where they have to remember long hexadecimal or other strings of letters, right? They want something that's user friendly, that you hit a button and it enacts in a second or so, like people expect from a normal app, where they have account names that they can easily remember. They can change the keys if they get stolen. They can even have some kind of recourse for going after people who've phished their accounts, or if they lost their own keys, there's a way to get them back. And they don't have to pay gas every single time. So out of this came a new generation of blockchain, which is third generation blockchain, that tries to address all of these things. And the strongest technology in the third generation blockchains, there's things like Tron, which claim to be third generation blockchains and have some of the features of it, but actually are essentially built on Ethereum. There are a few attempts at this. In my belief, the strongest attempt at this is something that grew out of the mind of Dan Larimer, which is EOS. EOS is a blockchain. It's the fifth or sixth most valuable blockchain right now, and it's built on a kind of software that's called EOSIO. And so that EOSIO software is available to to anyone who wants to use it. It's open source, and a group of people who were working on the EOS launch, we noticed that with all the advantages of EOS, and let me just touch on those really quickly. It's a half-second block time. It's not clogged at all. So it has a massive capacity, at least 5,000 transactions per second, real transactions per second. When you push a button, it actually works, so which is nice. There's no gas fee, right? So you can, for developers, you can write in a more robust language like C++ instead of Solidity. That's a small advantage. But for users, it has account names that they understand. It's 12 character account names that they can choose. If they need to change their keys, they can do so, and be in control. They can. There is a method of arbitration that is dispute resolution in case somebody steals your account, or in case you have some recourse, or in case you are working on a smart contract and it does something that is not what it was expected to do. You can go and get some kind of resolution to that, instead of a simple code is law, and whatever the computer does is what it does approach, which has led to many tiers over the years. So these are some of the advantages of EOSIO, and EOS itself, while it's a great technology, we had some real concerns with the implementation of EOS. It turned out that there was a massive amount of centralization of the ownership of it, and so we found that we could create a similar but different tokenomics by capping these massive whale accounts, reducing the token supply from by about one third, from 1 billion to about 330 million, just by capping a small number of accounts, and make it so that voters could actually have a real impact on the operation of the network. One of the things that makes it so fast is that rather than having a massive amount of miners all around the world competing through proof of work to make the smart contracts go. EOS is based on delegated proof of stake, which means that the people you vote basically based on any token holder can vote based on the amount of tokens that they have staked in the system, and they vote for the 21 validators called block producers that will actually operate the system. So if you have 21 or whatever the number, if you have a small number but large enough to be to not have to worry about Byzantine fault, tolerance. If you have this small but number of very powerful computers with excellent infrastructure and good continuous internet access, that allows you to be able to much more quickly process those transactions. So we have a block every half second. So that actually is essentially the limit, within a one order of magnitude of the limit of how fast you could have a global network, how fast light can travel all around the world through computer systems to interact with each other, and then still have a little time left over to process all the transactions. So EOSIO has all these technical advantages, and but because you vote for who is going to operate the network, what we were seeing in EOS itself is that there were just a few companies that were using their stake or buying votes from other companies to basically solidify power in a very few players that seemed to be working together, or that was the worry, and then could change the consensus it could control the consensus of the network. So when you have only 21 block producers, you need them to each be truly independent. So we built a system, Telos. We spent about 6 months building a system of Telos that first had that tokenomics change, but then also had a bunch of other changes that were good for the network. For example, we have backup block producers who are tested regularly to make sure that they run the network well and are ready to step in at any time, and a few other things like that for higher network resiliency. And we believe we have much better network resiliency. We have the most important thing, though, is we are really very friendly for developers. It's very inexpensive right now for developers to deploy an app on Telos for a few reasons. One is the token price is currently lower, but secondly, we managed to find a solution to the rampant RAM price swings that had hit EOS in its early days. They're not in there now, but they could come back because it's not necessarily a solved problem. It's just sort of a set aside problem. We have the way that a developer pays for their apps. The reason there's no gas price on Telos or on EOSIO is that instead of users paying for gas each time they do a transaction, a user or a app will set aside a large amount of resources. They'll set aside tokens to claim and for staking resources so that they will have their share of the network resources. And not only is the Telos token a lower price right now, but even when it matches the EOS price, you'll still get 3 times the amount of network resources for them that you would with EOS because of the 1/3 token supply. So it's a very and we have a program called the Good Grants, which is which my company does, which stakes all those resources for new apps coming on for their first year, so that they don't have to. The one negative of this is that there's a really high upfront cost for developers. So if you're an Ethereum developer and you want to put out an app, your users will be paying for all the transaction costs through the gas fee. you just shove that off on them. But if you wanted to launch the same app on Ethereum or on EOS, you would need to buy a bunch of EOS tokens and stake them so that you can perform all the network and CPU transactions that you need. With Telos, it's the same, except that we have a program that's staked with 5 billion tokens, which is 5 million tokens out of 330, which is equivalent would be the equivalent of more than 20 million tokens on EOS, because it's there's actually a set of tokens that are designated not to be staked. So our staking value is actually more than 3 to 1. Anyway, those are set aside for new apps to come in, so they don't have to pay that cost up front. They can get out, deploy, spend a year or sometimes more building their audience, building their customer base, and then at that point we taper them back off to covering their own resource costs. Telos also has we've been a technology leader in the EOS space. We've developed a number of things that are not on EOS yet, and may not be deployed on EOS. So one of those things is a system of voting. If you need to built-in voting, if you have any kind of voting or staking in your app itself, those functions are built right into Telos in a system called Trail that we use for our voting. We have extended voting, and any app can use those, and you can issue tokens that have all those voting features built in, which means not only do you not have to develop them yourselves, but you also don't have to spend time you spend resources paying for those. That's basically covered much more by the system. But basically, you don't have to develop those. It's a whole part of your app that you won't have to spend any time. You just plug into the system that exists, which is great. Another thing that we've added already is IPFS, which stands for Interplanetary File System. We are the first EOSIO system to have, and really the first third generation blockchain system to have an implementation of this that we've built into the protocol. And so IPFS, somebody likes IPFS. So IPFS is pretty exciting, and we are already using this for certain features like proposals for worker proposal systems and whatnot. But we are working right now on setting this so that anyone can use it. And I think we're within 8 to 10 weeks of turning out a version where there's a separate coin that you can use to pay IPFS providers. These people who set up big disk areas for this decentralized asset, this decentralized storage, and you can. And that's just an economic model that works. So that'll be 8 to 10 weeks. I think we're going to actually have that working where anyone can do it. Just a little bit about what's exciting about IPFS. If you are familiar with CryptoKitties, for example, if you look at CryptoKitties, you own a token, right? It's the ERC 721 token is on it. You own it, right? And it has all the traits for your CryptoKitty, but it doesn't have the picture, right? The one thing that a lot of people really care about the most is that picture of your kitty. And those are on a centralized server. And if that ever goes down, or the company goes out of business or whatever, those, you'll still have your token, but you won't have the picture of your kitty. Now multiply that out by, now if you look at a game that has a lot of more assets, right, than just one picture per kitty, but has a lot of assets, and those are stored somewhere. If that company ever goes under, those, or their servers go down, or they get DDoSed or whatever, those assets are not available. And suddenly the advantage of having a decentralized system where you own the token and you own the card forever go away. With IPFS, those can be stored on IPFS, and that means they're being stored on a decentralized system that available around the world, whether or not the original poster goes out of business or not. So it's very exciting, and that is going to be coming out on Telos really soon. I'm gonna pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions. See if the microphone problem has been solved. So Michael, I'm gonna send it back to you to see if you wanted any questions you wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Nope, I already hear it. Never mind. Never mind. Can somebody type a message? If somebody has any questions, can we type them? Yeah, Michael. So Michael, you're going to be typing a question, and yeah, please. Okay, great. Okay, so we have a question about DPoS, delegated proof of stake. How does it work? Great question. So we know with Ethereum that a consensus is built, decentralized consensus is built by a problem being sent out, and everyone, thousands of miners or mining groups around the world try to solve it. The one that does gets to write the block. And if people don't like it, then they can write another block, but that is at the expense of the opportunity to get paid to write the next block. And eventually, while there's micro forks, the longest chain wins, and everyone needs to get back on that chain or they won't be paid. So that's how proof of work works. Proof of stake, people have a concern about proof of work in that it's very energy intensive. I actually don't think it's as bad as normal economic systems are, but people tried something called proof of stake, and proof of stake means that it protects people. So proof of work protects the network by making it so that you actually have to do a lot of work in order to have the right to try to write to the network. And because you've done this work and you're doing this work on an ongoing basis to build value for yourself, you would be foolish to do something that would hurt the network. Proof of stake takes that same idea and says instead of doing work, you're going to stake a lot of tokens. And so that's what's going to prevent you from, that's when it's going to make it not in your interest to do something against the network, right? To attack the network. So the goal is always to keep people who are writing what's going to be on the network, who are continuing the consensus and validating the transactions, from having an interest in also attacking the network, right? So proof of stake, people go back and forth about how well it actually works, but the idea is that you take people who have a large amount of interest in the network, and you say, well, these people will make the decisions, and so we trust them because they would be hurting themselves. Delegated proof of stake. With both of these, though, the problem is anyone can run a computer, and those computers don't have to be, regardless of how well they're networked or how well or how fast they are or how well they're maintained. So with delegated proof of stake, the idea was that you could still have people stake a large amount of tokens or any amount of tokens to prove their fidelity to the network. And instead of them actually doing the work themselves, they would vote on the people who would do the work. They would vote, and their votes would be based, hopefully, on who was best for the network, because they're basically, instead of actually using their stake to allow themselves to do it, they would use their stake to allow them to select who would actually do it. Because it's not necessarily the case that just because you have a lot of tokens, you also have a lot of expertise in running the infrastructure of the network. So this decoupled that. So now you could vote for yourself if you wanted, of course, but you could vote for other people to actually run it. And so, and with the idea that you would vote for the people with the best infrastructure and the best interest of and the best experience and the best interest of the network. And so that's what DPoS does and how it works. That's it's proof of stake that's delegated out to through votes. And the way this works is if you on EOS or Telos or anything, if you are a token holder, then you can have liquid tokens or you can have staked tokens. You can stake tokens to reserve. They not only reserve resources, the net and the CPU, right? The network bandwidth and the actual computation, but by staking those, so that reserves your right to use a certain amount of resources on the network. At the same time, the amount you have staked can be used to vote for block producers on EOS. On Telos, it can be used to vote for both block producers, for block producers, to elect arbitrators who will hear any kind of dispute resolutions, to decide on worker proposal systems, which is a system whereby there's a certain amount of network inflation, 1.5% network inflation on Telos, 4% network inflation on annual inflation of the network value on EOS, and that's reserved for things that are voted by the token holders. EOS currently doesn't really have any way. EOS did not build a way to vote for worker proposals, but Telos did. That's another Telos improvement, and we intend to use that to fund the ongoing development. So you could use your staked tokens also to vote for that. You could vote for amendments to the governance of Telos. So if enough people vote for that, the governance can be updated in a decentralized way. So by staking, you reserve those funds, those network resources for yourself that we need because we don't have gas fees, and you also select, and have the right to vote either directly, by picking up to 30 block producers, or through proxies where you just select a proxy that then looks into it and does the day-to-day voting. That's essentially how DPoS works, and the advantages are much greater speed because you can have special network operating specialists running the network instead of just whoever happens to solve the proof of work fastest. That's fine when proof of work is fine when you are not running smart contracts, but if you need to run smart contracts, then you need to have a certain minimum amount of computational power, or else it just doesn't work well. Other questions? I'd like to talk about what this does for apps and dApps. I think the most exciting thing really about Telos and EOSIO is what it does for apps. So if you're a developer, think about this. You're a developer, and you could develop for a smart contract for anything, right? Your choices. So let's look at Ethereum versus EOS or Telos. If you want to develop something on Ethereum, there's a fairly large user base, right? There are people who feel fairly comfortable with the style of hexadecimal addresses and using MetaMask and using these things, and you can create your app, and these people will come to it to some extent, and you can run smart contracts, and that's great. The users will have to, every single transaction they do, have to, add a little bit of a gas fee. And even if they automate that, there's, it's kind of a pain, right? So not only is that a pain, but you can only do one transaction every 12 seconds. And even though that's speeding up to about 8 seconds, let's say you can only do a transaction every 8 seconds. That's still a pain. The network is very clogged, so that 8 seconds doesn't always, you're not going to get the first block. So it may be, 25, 30 seconds, maybe a minute before your transaction goes, depending on how clogged the network is. And you don't know how that's going to be. Now, Ethereum is working on has an upgrade, and that may be faster as they separate the network. We'll see. It's unknown. On the other hand, with EOS, and I would posit that it's that system with these hexadecimal addresses and unreplaceable keys and something sent to the wrong address is unrecoverable. Things like that, I actually think that they're just not gonna. I don't see that scaling. I don't see my friends who have no interest in blockchain adopting that, right? Personally. I think it has a long way to go before general users will interact with it. On EOSIO, you can have a system where people use an account name that they like, right? They just pick a 12-letter or less account name, and that's their account name. And if they need to change, and they probably only deal with their keys once, they can use something like MetaMask called Scatter. In order to interface with these systems, and it's really, you attach it once, and it's at least as easy and probably easier than MetaMask. It's more advanced, and it's easier for regular users, and so these people are likely to take it on, and your users won't have to come up with a gas fee every time they do a transaction. Which, if you think about an app that can have a lot of transactions, that really gets in the way of something like a game, right? Where you may want to make something happen every second or faster, right? That's this speed and the amount of transactions it can handle and the power of the transactions is really the advantage. So if you're a developer, you can pick a system where it's very user unfriendly, so much so that it limits its own ability to scale to the broader world, even of computer savvy people, let alone people who are less computer savvy. Or you can go on to an EOSIO system where people can have a transaction. They can push a button, and what they want done is done. It's done in half a second, right? And they can see that instantly, and it's not done half a second, 25 seconds from now. It's done, within a second or so. That speed is very important. It means that you can have many more transactions, and so you can have something like a game I used to design games, I still do. And one of the problems with all the EOS game, the Ethereum games is that you basically have to set up all your actions here and then push go, and then you watch as the best level, you watch as your transactions execute. But you don't get to, and all you can do is on the game is go, oh, I should have done that. Oh no, you don't get to interact. You don't get to say, oh well, the ogre came out, so now I'm going to use this, right? If you didn't set your program up ahead of time, you can't make that decision now, and that's a function of the fact that every Ethereum game really needs to have everything set up so that it all happens in one transaction, right? With EOS, because you can have a transaction every half second, and because you can count on being able to have those transactions, you can have a much better game, right? You could have a card game where you're actually making decisions about, card by card, rather than setting your whole hand and then just seeing how it plays out. without really participating, right? That's a direct outcome of the fact that you can make a decision every half second and know that it's going to happen. And you don't have to put more money in every time you do a decision. So an action. So that's a real difference. And games are a real place where that's going to make a big difference. But there's also financial places like if you're using a DEX, right? Being able to trade every half second is much better for people who are active traders than being able to trade every 12 seconds, right? Maybe. So there's a lot of advantages, and as these apps move towards more general use, business use apps, the ability for something to happen reliably every half second is really huge without having to put a cost in for every single action, and that's one of the big advantages. With Telos specifically, if you're that developer who's decided, okay, I see all the advantages here for not deploying on Ethereum and deploying on EOSIO software, a system like EOS or Telos. If you look at the one big gotcha is initially it's very expensive for those to buy all your resources. If you're a big company and you're well funded, that's great. If you're a grad student who has a great idea and that could change the world, but no resources, not so great. Either you have to give it up, right? Or you do it on Ethereum, even though it's not right because it takes so much longer, or it might just not work at all for your idea. Or you have to, go out and spend the next, 8 months trying to raise funds to convince people, or an ICO or whatever. And then suddenly you're not a developer anymore. You're a fundraiser and a company runner, right? So this resource cost really gets in the way of people who have a great idea but don't have access to initial financing, right? And that could be grad students, that could be that could be anyone in the developing world, it could be it could be a high school student, it could be anyone, right? There's the ability to have a great idea about a new Dapp is not necessarily coupled with having money, right? There's people who have money, there's people who have great ideas for apps, and there's a little overflow, there's a little overlap there, but it's not a one-to-one, right? So what we want to do is say, okay, well, let's take on Telos, we said, well, let's take away the need to be able to have a bunch of money up front. And then those app developers can go out and just build their app. They can come to us, we will give them their funds. We'll say, great, that's for a year. We'll give you the funds to run that, and then after that, we'll see whether you can, without taking any ownership of your company at all. We can, and then that gives these companies, these new developers, right? And when I say companies, it could just be, two guys or two girls or whatever who are trying to make something great for people to use without having to raise a ton of funds before they can even enter the game. So Telos gives them the ability to do that through things like RAM grants, through the Good Grants program for resources, through the lower token costs. And then they can also incorporate IPFS and built-in voting and a few other things that we're coming up with that are really app friendly. But in all other ways, any app on EOS, it can operate on Telos and vice versa. In fact, we already see apps coming in, like a very exciting one called Edna, which is eDNA, which is like a decentralized 23andMe, except 23andMe doesn't get to be Facebook and own all your data in this way. They initially deployed on Ethereum, on EOS, and now they are also coming in to deploy on Telos. And there's no major code rewrite or no real code rewrite at all needed for them, because the systems are basically the same at their core. It's just we've added some additional features. So that's exciting for apps, and there's so many things that the apps can do because the transactions are so fast and the computation power is higher, so you can do a lot more per transaction. Also, that's another important thing, right? You can do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 actions per block, right? where in Ethereum you could probably only do one, 1, 2, or 3, right? So that's actually a pretty big advantage too. It's much more scalable. So let me look at some of these questions here. Follow-up question: who would write the code for the voting algorithm? AKA, is there a standard voting algorithm, or anyone allowed to pick their own algorithm for who they vote for? For voting for block producers, the code is written. It's written by the people at Block One who were funded to write this software and maintain it. Telos writes its own software on top of that, in addition. So we adopt all the things that we like about, that work well about it, and then, which is almost everything right now, we're all caught up on, we're running at the same level of release level as EOS. And so that is built mainly by Block One. If we don't like it, we can change it on Telos because we have our own development team. EOS has block producers who are doing some development, but not strictly speaking a development team. So the voting for block producers is built in, but if you want to have come out with your own app and you want to use the voting system that we have built in on Telos to employ that, you can set all the you can still use that framework that we built, and you can set all the specific parameters for if you need a quorum of 60% or 70% on certain issues, if issues have to pass by civil majority or super majority or whatever. Those things can be dialed in by every single Dapp that is employing that. Michael asked about inverse voting. So on Telos, on EOS, one of the problems we saw was that even though people could vote for up to 30 block producers, we found that there were a small number of very large token holders who would just vote for themselves or 1 or 2, right? So when you vote for 30, the same amount of weight goes to each 30. So if you have 5 million tokens on EOS, and you vote for somebody, 5 million each block producer you vote for will get 5 million votes. And it's designed that way to spread it around, right? So you don't get this kind of concentration, but there's no enforcement of that. So if you want to weight your votes by only voting for yourself, if you're a block producer and you have 5 million tokens and you only want to vote for yourself, you can actually give your tokens much more weight by only voting for yourself and not 29 other block producers, right? Or any other number. We realized that was an exploit, and so on Telos we implemented something called inverse weighted voting, and that says that you can vote for as many as you want, but if you vote for a very small number, if you vote for 1, 2, or 3, you're going to have much less power for each of those votes than if you voted for 30. So essentially it works like this. If you vote for 15, you get half the weight. Your votes are counted at half their power. If you vote at 30, they're voted at full power. And if you vote for just 1, it's voted at a very small amount of power. So that's inverse weighted. And we found that it seems to be doing an excellent job of leveling out the voting and keeping it much more fair. We have not had any problem with whales coming in due to a number of things we've done, including having minimum requirements and actually enforcing them for block producers. So we've done a really good job actually at keeping the block producers, making the block producers responsible and keeping it decentralized. I'm very proud of that, but I actually don't think that's something. I think that's one of those things that people go, "Oh, that's cool," but now tell me more about the apps, because I want to either make or create. I want to create or use apps. Tell me more about that. I think that's what I'm really interested in. Most people are really interested in. Next question is, if someone wanted to develop an app that runs on Telos. Are the resources available to support this effort? Okay, well, I talked about that. So some of the resources that are available, the Good Grants program is going to stake resources for just about anyone, not gambling games and not anything that's exploitive of people. But other than that, anything goes. We're going to, and then the Telos Foundation is also going to have RAM grants. And so I think we're already coming out with, there's already applications that are coming out on the network that are using these. We also, as part of that program, give a bit of developer support, which means that you have access to the Telos core dev team for sort of sticky problems that you could use some help with, which actually helps. It's been really beneficial for the program, for the apps that are coming out already. So I hope that answers the question about resources and funding and whatnot. There's not, as for funding, well, let me talk 1 second about funding. So as for funding, that's not really a funding option, right? We will stake those for you, but at some point those come back. In return, we don't ask for any ownership in your company. We don't ask, you run your company. We'll give you the tokens for the use of the tokens for a year, and then those transfer back, tapering off so that you can keep running your business as you acquire those. But we don't ask for any. It's not like a VC fund where we ask for money in exchange. I believe there are going to be VC funds. I think even actually there's incubators. I think Michael could come back on and talk about the incubator that ZMeta has, where they go out and find great people. I know there's a Telos based incubator that's coming in San Francisco or in the Silicon Valley area, that's run by a number of the VPs in that area, like Infinity Block, are involved with, that are going to. So there is definitely a lot of excitement around Telos and EOSIO apps, and so people will. There's funding for people right now who actually want that VC funding. But the goal of Good Grants is to make it so that you don't have to spend all your time raising funding, and you could actually kick out, an app that instead of making a bunch of promises and raising money on that, you can actually build your app, start getting users, and then either bootstrap it into a successful business, or use that as something where you can show people that you actually have something that's up and running and working, and then get the capital that you need to make it a success through advertising and staffing up and things like that. Any thoughts on one token, one vote proposal by Block One? Sure. The one unfortunate thing about this is that I'm just kind of talking and I don't really understand. I am not able to get a sense of what the people in the room, what their level is. So I think that this one token, one vote proposal by Block One is an issue that people who are really into EOS care about, and nobody else does. So there's a proposal. So I'll just talk about it briefly. So there's a proposal that each token would only, instead of inverse weighting voting, you could, instead of having the ability to vote for 30 block producers, again giving the same weight to each with your votes. There's a proposal that you could just give. So for example, if you had 30 million tokens on EOS and you voted for 30 block producers, all 30 would get the weight of 30 million tokens. They're proposing something where you could actually just give all 30 million tokens to any one block producer, or you could divvy them up. So you could give, 1 million tokens worth of votes to each of these block producers. I'm not excited about that because I think, number one, it makes voting much more complex for regular users, and that's and it's already complex enough, right? The idea should be make voting simple. but still meaningful. And then the other problem I have with it is that it just compounds the problem of the hyper concentration of tokens and therefore votes that already exists on EOS. I don't think that's a solution. So I think that actually moving closer to something like inverse weighted voting, which a lot of people on EOS have suggested might be good for EOS to adopt as well. But something more that's broadening out the democratic base of voting is more important, because the one real problem that you have with delegated proof of stake is that if people do collude, if there is a cabal of people who are running it, then the consensus mechanism starts to break down. The way it's a great system as long as the people are actually independent and competing with one another. And competing doesn't mean, isn't always a dogfight, right? So on Telos, we compete with each other, but we also cooperate because we all have the common interest of running a good network. We actually reduced the competition a bit because on EOS, the more votes you get, the more money you get, straight up, right? So you get a certain amount for being one of the 21 who are voted in, but you get more if you get more votes. That's where most of the money comes from, is from getting more votes. On Telos, we thought when we were building it that created a system where it really heightened the competition and removed, which is important, but it discounted the importance of the cooperation amongst the block producers. I mean, this is basically a commons scenario where you can either have a tragedy of the commons where everybody's trying to take more and get more out of it and the commons collapses, or you can have, a successful commons where everyone sort of enriches each other and themselves through good management. And to do that, just in the few months that we were working as block producers on EOS, it became very apparent to me that it's more important to actually work together on things that are important to the network, and to compete on things that are contentious, right? So, but there are many situations where there is a certain amount of support that goes into keeping this network running, and that's a good thing, right? And that shouldn't be ignored. And the approach that we see on EOS, where everyone is paid, based on how many votes they get, really concentrates that sort of dogfight element of it. So on Telos, all the top 21 BPs are paid the same, and the 30 that are backups that are ready to step in at any time, and we know they are because we test them regularly, and they have to, and we remove them if they can't. Those get half that rate. So it's just if you're at number 7, you're not worried about the people at number 14 and trying to undercut the people at number 2, right, position, because you're all getting paid the same, right? Of course, everybody likes to be higher on the list but it's more about ego at that point than it is about finances. So I'm not excited about that one. Are there audience questions that we could take? Very interested in anything that the audience might be interested in hearing. Okay, last question. Does that mean that was the last question? So if that's being typed, I think that, any plans? So any plans for something similar to Rex? So Rex is a resource exchange. And again, we're very inside EOSIO right now. Rex is a resource exchange where people who own tokens that they aren't using right that moment could put them into a pool and get paid back by people who wanted to basically borrow against those. And that's a way to sort of make a little bit of income off of your tokens that are not, sitting but not being used, especially if somebody who has them as an investment, but or wants to use them for an app someday, but isn't right now. Rex is software code that's in the final stages of being built by Block One, and they've already had a release candidate. So they basically released a version that we can look at and play with, and they're maybe the right one, they think. So one thing that's exciting about Telos is everyone feels that in order to, Rex is enough of a change that it would have the community would have to vote to accept it, because it does change some things. So when this was coming down the pike, we at the Telos launch group discussed it and had a vote and voted to include that with our governance, since we were still running our governance at that point. So Telos is probably almost certainly going to be the first of all these EOSIO sister chains to actually have Rex, because it's already been announced, or it's already been approved by in the governance, and we have our own development team that we can implement that with. So in short order, as soon as as soon as it's no longer a release candidate, but it's a final version, we will start implementing that into the system. So in short order, we're going to see IPFS and Rex on Telos. So it's very exciting. So I would say, I know it looked like we're near the end. I would say if you are a developer who's interested in developing any kind of smart contract based Dapp, I think that Telos is a great place to look. You get all the technical advantages of a third generation blockchain, right? You don't want to in 2019 deploy on, no one wants to be the last one to deploy Ethereum based smart contract. You want to get on in the third generation blockchains, and of those, Telos has a lot of advantages because it's built on the EOSIO system. So it has really the best software, and it solves the problems that are existing on that system on EOS. And you have the ability to have other people pay for your resources, so that you can just create a great Dapp and go out and spend all your funds that you have to spend on development and acquiring users and improving your software for a year. After that time, then hopefully you have a working, running business. So I think that's actually, as a developer myself, I know that that's a huge advantage, and I hope people take advantage of it. If you have any questions, we are very happy to speak further. There's a Telegram channel called the Telos Community and Telos Developers. And I'm sure we have the links here. You can find out more about some of these projects, like the Good Grants project on my company page, goodblock.io, and you can find out all the very few requirements. It's a very easy thing to apply to, and there's the Telegram thing, right? The Telegram at Hello Telos. There's a Twitter handle, and there's a lot of resources. We put together a lot of documentation, so it's going to be very easy for people to get on Telos and start building apps. All right, thanks everybody. I really appreciate getting to be here. You hit us up on Telegram if you have any follow-up questions.